really be interesting, like we said, to see how things work out. You really have to adjust your game plan when you go against the mirror match, right? It's something when you're preparing your deck for a tournament, you're testing against all the other decks you think you'll play against. You never really spend time playing against your deck, right?
Yeah, well, even though they do have the same overall general strategy here of trying to get a Vileplume out as soon as possible and lock their opponent out of being able to comfortably play the game, they do have a different, I guess, strategy when it comes to the actual attacker option, as we do get to see Grant HAYS here kind of give us the little spoiler alert here, where we have that Sceptile GX to be paired with that Vileplume. Now, the Sceptile GX is likely going to be the main attacker out of Grant's deck coming into this matchup.
Yeah, and we see his accomplishments here. Definitely a player who has had success top 8 the DC Open this year, as well as in 2017 getting a top 8 at Collinsville Regionals and top 16 at the North American Internationals. Awesome, awesome accomplishments for sure. Top 8 here in Dallas is amazing as well, and I'm sure Grant is looking to make a deeper run in this tournament if he can.
Yeah, there's perhaps no wins in his resume there, but there are a lot of great finishes, so he's a very consistent player, is Grant HAYS. Now, if we can take a look at GIBSON Tang, his opponent here, we are also going to be seeing Vileplume out of GIBSON, but he's actually got two different, he's only basically featuring these Vileplumes as his line of defense, so to speak. These are going to be his Pokemon, his evolutions to search out for. He isn't exactly going to be going for a Sceptile attacker. He's just going to be powering up these large Pokemon as well as the Alolan Exeggutor.
Right, and I think that this is going to be an interesting factor in this matchup. The fact that Grant has the Sceptile GX is actually a big difference. It's a more efficient attacker. We talked about this earlier on when we were talking about the deck. All of the attackers in GIBSON's version of the deck require 3 energies. It's going to be 3 energies before you can really do much of anything as far as damage output. The Sceptile, on the other hand, it only needs 2 in order to start swinging for 130, and just 1 to start swinging for 60. And it's going to be another interesting point here is going to be, these players don't play a lot of item cards, where normally Vileplume with Irritating Pollen is a key part of your strategy. It's not going to be as big of a factor here, I think, in this mirror. As we're taking a look at the players' prizes, we do see one of the Sceptiles prized on Grant's side. Vileplume GX, a nice new addition from Cosmic Eclipse in GIBSON's list, is actually in the prize cards.
So that's one thing I was about to mention, is that Vileplume GX could prove to be a key factor here in this matchup between Grant and GIBSON, as that's kind of the one thing that GIBSON plays that Grant doesn't. Grant may play a much stronger line when it comes to attacking than that Sceptile GX, but GIBSON was the only player to play the Vileplume GX in this matchup, and if it's prized, that could be one of the key factors that could lead to a victory here for Grant.
Right, and I think, you know, an important factor is going to be the healing aspect that Vileplume GX can provide, thanks to its ability healing 30 damage from all Pokemon, and that's just not something GIBSON's going to have access to until he starts to take some prizes. It looks like we are kicking things off, though. Grant HAYS looking through his deck right away. Looks like on his side he started a Rowlet and a Alolan Exeggutor Tag Team GX, and Oddish over on Gibby's side.
We do indeed see Grant HAYS start things off here. We are going to be seeing Grant look through his deck right away. Of course, wanting to set up as many Pokemon as you can. You want to start getting your Oddishes benched so that you can start evolving them as soon as you can start attacking. Now, of course, because Grant's going first, that means he won't be able to necessarily get the first Vileplume into play. But at the same time, GIBSON starting with an Oddish, not the ideal starter. You'd prefer to start with the Alolan Exeggutor. But, of course, if you can get a turn 1 Exeggutor, you will be fine.
And an interesting card coming out here on Grant's side is playing the Netball, not something we see actually too terribly often in these decks. We talked about this earlier on, how it seems like the decks are really only playing the 5 item cards in the Pokegear and the A-Spec of choice. Does play the Nestball, a really cool option, allowing him to grab either a Grass-type basic Pokemon or have the option to get a basic Grass Energy. We do see him opt for the Oddish and attaches to Trico right away, so it looks like he is going to value that Sceptile. Yeah,
that Trico, of course, going to be the most powerful attacker eventually once it becomes a Sceptile GX. But first we see a Power Plant out of GIBSON as he starts his first turn of the game right away, finding himself the Alolan Exeggutor and, of course, a couple of Oddishes to go with it. Now, At this point, he looked through his deck so fast that I don't know if he necessarily sees that he doesn't have the Vileplume GX quite yet, but I have no doubt that he will pretty soon, and he's going to have to plan accordingly. As, of course, getting a Vileplume into play against the Vileplume deck is not a bad idea, but you really do want to start getting multiple evolutions into play.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, the disgusting Pollen Vileplume from Burning Shadows is going to be one of Gibson's best attackers here outside of the Rallied Executor itself. As we see right away, Gibson does go for that Burning Shadows plume. So it's going to require 3 energies, though, and he already had to use one to manually retreat into the Rallied and Alolan Executor, so that's 1 resource already down.
Now let's take a moment to talk about the Disgusting Pollen. What can Disgusting Pollen do in this kind of a situation against Grant?
Well, its ability is obviously makes it so that basic Pokemon can't attack, so it's going to make it so that Grant's Rallied and Executor can't attack, but it doesn't do anything against the Sceptile. Sure. And 130 is not quite going to be able to knock out the Vileplume, but I think as an attacker, it's really just going to be Gibson's best option thanks to Downer Shock, doing 60 damage and then flipping a coin. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep. If tails, your opponent's active is now confused. So that could be a big deal.
We see the Grovyle come into play here after Grant starts his second turn of the game. Of course, not able to attack with the Alolan Executor, but he still does have a Grovyle in his own hand, so it's going to make things a little bit easier for him to start getting set up, as, of course, that Grovyle's Sunshine Grace ability going to allow him to find himself an Oddish, and now a Gloom coming into play as well. So despite not having access to his attacks, he's still able to start getting his evolutions into play, even if it wasn't necessarily the fastest way possible. Yeah, and we talked about this earlier on, how Sunshine Grace was a big deal for this version of the deck, just giving you that kind of free Pokemon search every turn, especially once item lock goes up. It can be very strong. We actually saw a Cherish Ball as well from Grant on this past turn, which is really interesting to me. So it seems like he's going for a lot different approach as far as deck building goes with his trainers from what we've seen in the past. Now, energy does get attached onto the Alolan Executor as well as the Stealthy Hood.
Yeah, Stealthy Hood is actually interesting because it will allow the Rowlet and Executor to attack through Disgusting Pollen because it's no longer affected by that ability, as Gibson is just going to play a Cynthia and Caitlin to draw 3 here. But once again, it's going to take him a couple turns before he can even realistically get there. So it looks like we're just right away going to see a Super Growth once again. We'll see which Vileplume he wants to eye up here. It looks like it will be the Irritating Pollen, and I think this is fine because, you know, if you're Gibson, you have seen several item cards from Grant. So you are kind of getting the idea that his deck is maybe built a little less conventionally than what, you know, most would be. And wanting to shut down these items might be a good option for Gibson at this point. Now,
at this point, I think that because we're already seeing the evolutions come into play here for Grant, Gibson may not even want to necessarily get a Disgusting Pollen Vileplume as his active Pokemon. I don't think that it's necessarily going to be a powerful effect right now, right? You probably just want to start powering up your bench through your Alolan Executor and slowly but surely building up this Alolan Executor as your attacker of choice. But in the meantime, of course, Grant is just still firing on all cylinders. And both of these players just seem to be getting their ideal setups.
And we do see the Gloom there using that ability. It allows you to flip a coin. If heads, you get to see your opponent's hand. And then you can choose to put a basic Pokemon you find there on to their bench. So Grant gets a free peek at Gibson's hand, which is actually a pretty useful, you know, attribute in the Pokemon trading card game, being able to get a peek at your opponent's hand. You can kind of have an idea of what their game plan might be.
So at this point, both of these players are looking to power up an attacker. Of course, we already see 2 energy on the Sceptile GX and 1 energy on the Alolan Executor. What is Gibson going to try to do in order to avoid Sceptile GX just kind of running him over?
He's going to have to try to bring it up eventually with something like a Guzma potentially, or just wait until Grant has it active and then try to, you know, start hitting it as hard as he can. It does have 230 hit points, so he's not even going to be able to knock it out with a Calming Hurricane GX, which caps at 230. So it's going to be a 2-hit knockout regardless of what Gibson does. And then we could maybe even see a Jungle Heal come out on Grant's side, healing some damage.
So now both players still setting up. You see both players furiously shuffling their decks. They're both going to be drawing 6 new cards as an end was played here. Now, this may be a pretty interesting and confusing matchup for viewers watching at home because we're seeing basically lots of action, but no attacks happening quite yet, at least no damaging attacks.
Yeah, it's kind of just a grindy setup game at this point. We're going to have to see who is the first to strike at this point. I would kind of give the edge to Grant since he does have that more efficient attacker, and it does look like Gibson did with the energy attachment on the last turn, so I'm sure he's definitely going to be looking for that here moving into this one.
Now, of course, he does still have that Alolan Executor with Rowlet Tag Team GX in that active position, just kind of not in any particular danger, but still we're starting to see some cards played here from Gibson as we're seeing him continue to draw into, well, no energies, unfortunately for him, but just about everything else.
Yeah, honestly, Gibson's own Irritating Pollen kind of messing him up there. There's no item lock over on Grant's side of the field, and Gibson did draw into a computer search. That could have found him the energy attachment he needed this turn, but unable to play it thanks to Irritating Pollen.
Well, here we go. We may see our first damaging attack of the game as Sceptile GX gets promoted to the active position, and now we're going to see a third energy hit the field here for Sceptile, and then he immediately get benched onto that Alolan Executor, and 130 damage now on Alolan Executor and Rowlet Tag Team GX. That's first damage dealt from Grant HAYS here.
Right, and Gibson is really going to be looking for something like an AZ to kind of limit this damage. He's honestly kind of in a tricky spot. I don't know if there's really too much he can do, and he is just going to have to use Steven's Resolve, which will end his turn, meaning he's kind of conceding the fact that this Rowlet and Executor is going to get knocked out.
So that's going to mean 3 prizes going to Grant HAYS before we even, and honestly, there's going to be no energy in play for Gibson either. Is this going to be too insurmountable for Gibson? Is Grant HAYS' aggression with that Sceptile GX going to be too much for him? That's what we're going to have to find out in just a few short turns.
Oh, and this is a big in as well from Grant. Gibson just used that Steven's Resolve. It ended his turn. He didn't get to do anything else and just searched his deck for 3 cards. Grant says, nope, put those back into your deck right away. And combining an in with a big knockout is always very strong. We did see the Leaf Cyclone last turn. That's actually a big part of this as well, getting the energy attachment to the active and moving it to the bench, meaning that he's powering up that Rowlet and Executor.
And we do see a heads here from Grant.
Yep, Irresistible Aroma, once again letting him look at his hand. No basic Pokemon, once again, but he's able to get a look and have an idea of what Gibson can do, and I didn't see any basic energy once again.
This Sceptile is just looking so strong in this matchup, really, especially obviously because Gibson wasn't able to get any energy into play on the first few turns, so that's just starting to really creep up on Gibson as we see now 2 energy on the benched Alolan Executor from Grant, and now as the Pokemon gets, I believe he got Ace rolled it up.
AZ, actually, since those cards did get discarded. So not quite able to pick up the 2-hit KO. Leaf Cyclone doing 130, and Rowlet and Executor having that massive 270 hit points. It looks like Gibson's actually just going to have to send up the Vileplume and let it get knocked out.
And now that Vileplume, I believe that's the Disgusting Pollen Vileplume, if I'm not mistaken.
Irritating Pollen.
Oh, it's the Irritating Pollen.
We've got all the pollens here in this game for sure. Hard to keep track of. And
all I know is I'm getting an allergy attack just looking at it. I can't really tell from what.
And we will see Grant right away using Sunshine Grace once again, looking for a Grass-type Pokemon. Gets his own item lock, and this is actually a great time. Maybe Gibson is trying to feed Grant this Vileplume in order to knock it, in order to get access back to his items, and if Grant can get his own item lock moving, that can prevent that.
A big-time Guzma here from Grant. Now, keep in mind there is a limited amount of energies here in both of these Alolan Executor decks, so the fact that 3 energies were already gone meant that Sceptile GX may not be able to keep doing a consistent 130. So we had that Guzma now, as now we get to see once again the Alolan Executor from Gibson take damage before it can even do any sort of threatening attack. And that just means that Gibson is in an uncomfortable position once again.
We do see it kind of seems like Gibson's approach has been very different. I don't know if it's what his actual strategy is in this game or if it's just kind of the hand he's been dealt, but it's been a much more stall approach to the game. He's not really going after attacks, or hasn't been getting energies to at least, whereas Grant is able to be just so much more aggressive thanks to Sceptile GX.
All right, now this time I'm sure that we're going Disgusting Pollen against Disgusting Pollen, and now both of these Vileplumes get benched right away. Simultaneously, but it means that both Alolan Executors become the active Pokemon, and that means that once again Gibson's Alolan Executor takes the damage from Grant, and that's now 3 prizes taken from Grant, and it's the first 3 prizes of this match as Grant is 1 tag team knockout away from winning game 1.
Right, and Gibson right away, he had the Rowlet Executor in his hand. I think he's definitely aware that if that gets knocked out, I'm going to lose the game. Decides not to bench it, and it's just going to go for an N, limiting Grant's hand back down to 3. Gibson's still going to draw 6, looking for an energy card here. He actually has the Weakness Guard energy. That's an interesting tech that he plays in his list.
These would be powerful effects if he had energy in play, like ending your opponent down to a 3-card hand, then potentially putting a lot of damage counters on the Alolan Executor would put you in a good position in a lot of cases. But because you can't actually attack your opponent, it seems like Gibson is just kind of slowing down the inevitable. And it seems to me like he's almost assuredly going to be losing game 1 here.
Yeah, it's not looking great. Actually, the draw energy over on Gibson's side, letting him actually get a little bit of draw going under that item lock, a nice option as opposed to Weakness Guard energy. Grant now searching through his deck, and it really does feel like this game is his to win, right? Gibson doesn't really have a great answer to this Sceptile GX, it feels like. Obviously, the Rowlet Executor currently cannot attack because of Disgusting Pollen on Gibson's side, but I mean, Grant can eventually get an AZ, he can get a Guzma, and just bring back up anything on that bench and start attacking with Sceptile once again.
Yeah, I mean, the reality of it is that we saw energy come into play for one player and the other player just kept passing.
Yeah.
When that happens, of course, that's just, you're going to be in this board state eventually. Your opponent's eventually going to overwhelm you. With that said, I mean, keep in mind, this is only game 1. You still have to win 2 games in order to win the match. So it's not over until it's over, but this particular game may very well be over.
And it's just going to be a mock cut on Grant's side. Gibson's draw energy does get discarded thanks to that effect of the attack. And it's just going to be another Steven's Resolve. I wonder if Grant can combine this with another N. He's played several, so there's a chance he doesn't have access to many more. Does get to see the hand once again on Gibson's side. Still no energy. And Grant did choose to hard retreat that Vileplume, excuse me, the Rowlet and Alolan Executor tag team last turn, meaning that he's down a good amount of energy. Maybe Gibson can try to formulate a strategy where he just stalls that active to potentially win the game if, like, Grant has less cards in his deck than Gibson does.
Yeah, I mean, he felt like he had no choice, but keep in mind, we said this earlier, there is a limited amount of energy in both of these decks.
Right.
So when you're forced to discard 3 of your energies, that's almost half of your energy gone.
Yeah,
so
Grant does play that Brock's Grit, so he has the option to get several back, but it's definitely a slow grind. Gibson also playing Brock's Grit, and he also has the Cynthia and Caitlyn's in his list, so he actually has a way to use multiple Brock's Grits throughout the game because of that extra effect.
So he can retreat a little bit more than his opponent can.
Right.
All right, Tapu Lele hitting the field, starting to find any supporter card in his hand.
And it's just going to be a Guzma once again trying to set up for the next turn. And he definitely wants to get this Vileplume out of the, the Rowlet Executor out of the active spot because it's not really doing much as is.
Yeah, that Guzma, just a powerful effect, kind of stops you from having to retreat and discard 3 energies. Now, Gloom going up against the Alolan Executor. And it looks like it's a pass here from Grant.
And that's a big AZ, healing off 120 damage and going to get that Vileplume back into the active spot. No longer a Guzma target on for Grant on the next turn. And it does seem like Gibson is going to try to go for this lone Vileplume strategy. An interesting one since Sceptile can attack it, since it's not a basic Pokemon, of course.
My guess is he was banking on Sceptile just not finding any more energies.
Yeah, maybe so, and maybe just hoping that it takes Grant a while to find those energies at least, so that he can, chip away at it slowly but surely. But an interesting factor here is going to be that Jungle Heal GX, which even if Gibson does chip away at it, at that Sceptile, all that damage can get healed off really quickly.
No kidding. Now, Vileplume taking 60 damage, passing the turnover? Potentially, no. Never mind. It was going to be the Gloom ability instead. Yep. It looks like now he's passing the turnover to Grant.
Yep, and Grant not quite going to be able to get a knockout on this Vileplume unless he finds another energy, but he actually might be in a position where he doesn't want to knock out this Vileplume because Leaf Cyclone does force you to move a grass energy to your benched Pokemon. He might want to hang on to that energy and save it for a more effective attack against a, Burning Shadows Vileplume.
Mallow and Lana actually healing off the 120 damage on that Vileplume and promoting a new one. Now, that's the second Vileplume with this irritating pollen.
Grant did draw grass energy for turn, so it looks like we will go back on the offensive using Leaf Cyclone, taking the KO. Looks like we're just clearing some stuff up here.
So that is a second energy attached to the Sceptile GX, which means it can use its attack Leaf Cyclone to deal 130 damage onto this Vileplume.
Yep, just want to make sure everything is good to go there, and looks like all is clear with the judges and both players. And
there's the third energy.
Here we go. Gibson's ready to start swinging with Downer Shock. And this is kind of an interesting card because it's going to really depend on if he gets heads or tails what the effect is going to be.
Right. Remember, if heads, he's asleep. If tails, he's confused. Either way, your opponent is going to be in status, is going to have a status condition applied to it.
Right.
Now, here's the flip. It looks like it's right off our view. And
it does go to sleep.
From what I can tell, it looks like it's asleep, but it... Okay, yeah, it looks like it's asleep, and he does wake up. So Sceptile GX was sleeping for only a short minute, as now it's right back and ready to go. But does he have an energy to start dealing more damage, or is he just going to be able to deal 60 damage? Looks like, well, there was a tails, but he still managed to show his hand. And then 60 damage later, we're back to Gibson's hand, or back to Gibson's turn. And now we see a Bridget. Gibson potentially able to turn the tides here. Keep in mind, I mean, it's going to be a slow climb back up if he does get to do so, but he does have the potential to do it, as now he has a Vileplume raring to go with a Downer Shock. Downer Shock gets a heads. That's going to mean he's asleep again. Will he wake up? He does. He
does. Actually, something I've noticed over in Grant's hand and from his list, he does play a Life Forest Prism Star Stadium, which is actually a big deal. You can use it... Either player obviously can use stadiums, but you heal 60 damage from one of your grass Pokemon, and also all special conditions. So once it comes into play, even if he does stay asleep or confused, he can put that in play to counteract whatever the Downer Shock flip was the last turn.
Man, it's a small hand here for Gibson. Looks to have very few options available to him. It looks like we're going to be going for the Cynthia and Kalen. And, all right, draws 3 cards. Which supporter did he get back? Was
it looked like it was an
Alomana?
in. No, it was that in, that full art in from that promo box.
Confused now. Heads on Gloom. Now, will he fight through this confusion? If he gets the heads, the game is basically over.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably see that Life Forest come down since it should heal the special condition right away. That is what he does.
There's Life Forest. Just a crucial card in this situation. That Vileplume with only 20 hit points remaining seems to be on the verge of getting knocked out, and so will 3 of his energies.
There we go. Grant Hayes taking his 5th prize down to just 1 prize card remaining. Gibson has yet to take a prize card in this game, but a big in coming out in down to 1 card. If there's any card that can bring Gibson back into this game, it's going to be in.
All right, and brings Grant down to a single card in his hand. Grant going down to 1, Gibson finding 6 new ones, but with only 1 energy in play. Will he be able to muster up any type of aggression? We see 1 energy in hand, and right away it gets attached to the Alolan Executor. Did Grant find anything? That's a 2-card hand now after drawing first turn.
This game actually is going to end up being pretty close because Grant's last prize card was that Sceptile GX, that second copy of the card. So he might not have access to it if he can't find his Brock's Grit, getting this Sceptile back if it gets knocked out. So if Gibson can take the knockout here, maybe a Disgust Impalling could close out the game.
That is a lot to ask for, given the fact that he doesn't have any grass energy in hand quite yet, but we can definitely potentially see the turn of a tide here. Now, Super Boost energy being eyed down.
Another interesting tech on Grant's side. It seems like this is very different from the conventional Rowlet and Exeggutor list, which I definitely really like to see. Super Boost Energy providing 4 energy of every type if it's attached to a Stage 2 Pokemon, and there are at least 3 Stage 2s in play. He's not quite there yet, but getting that single energy attachment in order to be able to use something like Leaf Cyclone or one of the Vileplume's attacks could be very crucial. And looks like Gibson here going to just go ahead and use Steven's Resolve. Not a great turn, but he didn't take any damage on his Rowlet and Exeggutor.
Now, this Life Forest may actually start to help Gibson a little bit more than it will Grant from here on out.
Yeah, it definitely could, especially if Grant's only attacking option is going to be using Mach Cut for 60 damage. That's just all damage that Gibson's going to be able to heal away. But Grant will be able to use Life Forest one more time this turn and be able to heal that Sceptile completely.
Steven's Resolve, such a powerful effect if you can keep it in your hand. Now, I believe Grant's up to a 3-card hand.
You're going to use that Irresistible Aroma. No basics to put down, but, you know, still have to use it, still have to try to get that optimal use of the ability. Try to see if you can get an idea of what your opponent has in your hand. Grant actually dropping a card on the table there, revealing the Super Boost Energy. That's something that could be big that Gibson might not have known that he has.
Yeah, what a card to reveal, right? It seems like that's just about the worst card you can possibly show your opponent there, as now we're going to be seeing Gibson potentially play around this Super Boost Energy if he can.
Gibson surveys his option. Does have a Grass Energy in hand. Oh, we're still over on Grant. He's going to actually get that Super Boost Energy in play.
Okay.
And he's going to hard retreat this Sceptile.
Sceptile retreats. That brings up the Vileplume.
Downer Shock going to be a good attack option. Actually chooses to get rid of that Life Forest. Doesn't want Gibson to just heal that damage and whatever special condition he gets affected with. And also combines this with a Colress. Going to find himself 7 cards at this point.
Oh, man. Huge turn here from Grant. Will he be able to finish this game off? He gets rid of that Life Force, which means we may see the status condition just stick onto Gibson. Remember, 60 damage, and you either put your opponent to sleep or confuse it. This could be huge here for Grant.
I do believe Grant has used all 3 of his Guzmas that he has in his list at this point. We've seen him use it multiple times at least. So that could be a factor as well. And Gibson's actually going to go ahead and just concede the game. Game 1 going to Grant HAYS. Definitely felt like he was very favored in that match.
Yeah, with that Life Force getting countered, that really felt like it was just going to be too much to overcome, as the 140 hit points from the Vileplume combined with the 60 damage attack and status conditions was just too much for Alolan Executor to really overcome. Now, with that said, this game ended up being quite close, despite it looking so lopsided early on. Now, that has a lot to do with the fact that these decks don't really deal a lot of damage, but they do have a lot of hit points, and they do slow your opponent down a lot. So it seems like players can make comebacks rather easily in this matchup.
Right, and it did seem like if Gibson had been able to deal with that Sceptile GX, maybe he had a chance in that one, but Grant just had the cards left he needed in order to close the game out, and it is going to win game 1 here in top 8, gets himself closer to that top 4 spot, and there is a big difference between top 4 and top 8. A lot more championship points. You double the prize money you earn. Top 8, you earn $750, and moving on to the top 4, $1,500. Definitely a big difference, as well as getting yourself that nice regionals top 4 trophy, which you don't get for top 8. That's a big thing that people want, right? They want to put that glass on the shelf, and there's a lot that these players are playing for.
And I think most importantly, you get to continue playing Pokemon, and you get to continue hoping to be the regional champion out of this tournament. Now, we do see prizes come down, players not taking any time to do so, as we see one Trico, a Tapu Lele, and of course one of the Vileplumes. I think Brock's Grit was one of the important cards to also see prized.
Yeah, and that could be actually a reasonable factor. It looked like it was at the bottom of Grant's prize card, so if he takes his prizes in like the normal way that most players do, he'll be able to have access to it, but it definitely can be a key resource in these games that tend to go really long and really grindy.
All right, Steven's Resolve potentially going to be the first supporter of the game here for Gibson. A great supporter to play on turn 1.
Right, you can't attack anyway because of the turn 1 rules that are in place at this point, so Steven's Resolve is letting you get 3 cards, going to be the best way to do it.
All right. Steven's Resolve finding 3 cards here for Gibson before, of course, it ends his turn. Now, Grant, starting with Tapu Lele, of course, not the Pokemon you want to start with, but that Netball is the ideal turn 1 item card out of Gibson's or Grant's hand. Yep. Now, he has lots of options with that Netball, right?
Yeah, he can get a Trico. He can find himself an Oddish if he needs it. He can find himself the Rowlet and Alolan Executor. I feel like I've seen a lot of times in these matchups players opting, when they have the Sceptile, going for that very quickly because of the Sunshine Grace ability of Grovyle, being able to just continually get Pokemon in your hand throughout the rest of the game. As we see Grant doing something that's actually really key in the Pokemon trading card game. He's going through, taking his time looking through the deck and counting his prize cards. We actually saw him bring down all of the Grass energies in his deck. He knows how grindy this matchup is and knows that he's going to need access to probably all of his energies at some point. So he went ahead and made note of how many he has access to, if any are prized.
Yeah, had yet to shuffle his deck, and then he does so after playing that in. Looked like he was debating potentially finding other, but potentially playing other cards before playing that in, but instead chooses to play the end, shuffling both players' hands into their decks, and of course a powerful supporter to play after your opponent's just Steven's Resolved.
Yep, Steven's Resolve right there on the top of the discard pile, and Gibson just has to put all of those cards right back into the deck. We were talking about how great of a turn that was, where he's not able to attack, so he gets to search for the 3, and Grant just kind of erases that and just totally resets Gibson's hand.
So now, with both players going back to a 6-card hand, of course, we still want to see a turn 1 Alolan Exeggutor finding the first evolution of the game here for Grant, if you're Grant. But finding both Oddish and Trico is a great start as well, as both of those Pokemon are the key Pokemon to have on turn 1.
Great cards to find right away. If he can find a Grovyle on the next turn, Sunshine Grace is just going to give him that consistent Pokemon search through the rest of the game. We do see Gibson grabs a Faba off of the Pokegear. One key card he got off of the Steven's Resolve last turn that he just doesn't have anymore because it got shuffled in was that Stealthy Hood, a tech card that he plays, and it's useful for this specific matchup. And just not something he has anymore because it got shuffled away.
Now, why does Stealthy Hood become useful in this matchup?
Because of that Downer Shock ability on the opposing Vileplume. If he can get it on a Rowlet and Exeggutor and Grant is not able to remove it, then Gibson's obviously able to attack with that Rowlet and Exeggutor and take a one-hit KO on the Vileplume. We actually are going to see Grant be a little aggressive here, Guzma up that Vileplume, hope to lock it active, and is actually going to look for a Pokemon and put it in his hand thanks to the attack of Trico there. Looks for a Rowlet and Exeggutor, and it's going to be back over to Gibson. Can he move this Vileplume?
Some quick turns from both of these players as now Grant does pass the turn over to Gibson, and Gibson immediately plays a Guzma of his own, promoting that Alolan Exeggutor right back, and of course the Oddish for Grant. Of course, Oddish with no energy on it, it does mean that it could get stuck in that active position, not allowing the Alolan Exeggutor from Grant to evolve it.
Grant
Now it seems like he does have the grass energy, does Grant, so we will potentially see an Alolan Exeggutor evolution here.
Gibson did miss a grass energy attachment on his last turn, and that's really been kind of the story of both of these games so far, is Gibson not being able to find the energy cards that he needs in order to get attacks off quickly. And that's kind of what we were talking about with the advantage that Grant feels like he has thanks to Sceptile GX. Having that efficient 1 and 2 energy attacks, it really makes a big difference.
Yeah, both of these players play the same amount of energies, but they have different energy requirements for their attacks.
Really interesting play here from Grant. He could have gone all the way up into Sceptile GX thanks to Super Growth. It does allow him to get the stage 2 in play, but chooses to stop at Grovyle, and it's because of that Sunshine Grace. He wants to be able to utilize that ability and find more and more Pokemon.
All right, so now it looks like players are just shuffling each other's decks at this point, and we do see the Vileplume GX hit the field for the first time in this match for Gibson. So Vileplume GX has a very powerful ability in Fragrant Flower Garden. Try to say that 3 times really fast.
Not on stream. That might make me look a little silly. And it actually has a pretty relevant attack as well with the Massive Bloom. That actually is a way for Gibson to get some energy-efficient attacking going.
So Gibson and Grant, both players with that Alolan Exeggutor and Rowlet Tag Team GX. Both players starting to get their evolutions into play. We see how Grovyle can help you find your basic Pokemon for you to continue finding evolutions for. There are so many cool things that this Sceptile lets this Vileplume deck do that it seems like it's just the most important and key card in this matchup for Grant.
We are going to see Gibson does choose to play an in. No player has taken a prize card yet. We saw this kind of in the first game. It's a much slower early game until that first big knockout can be taken by either player.
So both players going to shuffle in, draw 6 new cards. Now at the same time, we are seeing evolutions hit the field here for Gibson, but no energy. That's exactly what we want to see. And right away, we see 2 of them. Big time energies as we see the Vileplume GX start to get the energy attached to it. Remember, Vileplume GX has a 2 energy attack, which is very important for this matchup, dealing 180 damage. And then as long as you have no damage counters on you, you're going to be dealing that 180. The more damage you take, the less damage you deal. It
actually has a good GX attack potentially as well in Allergic Explosion, being able to burn, paralyze, and poison your opponent's active Pokemon. Efficient attack in just 1 single energy and getting 50 damage out there, which is not irrelevant. Grant can, of course, counteract that with his Life Forest Prism Star that we know he plays. But Gibson not prizing the Vileplume GX this game is going to make a big difference. And he is going aggressive here.
Oh, man. Here we go. Another aggressive play here out of Gibson.
Going to go ahead and Guzma bring up that Sceptile GX. He is going to be able to hit this for a solid 180 damage. Going to set up that 2-hit knockout. Actually going to use that GX attack first.
Okay, so there's the GX attack that we were just talking about. It's now burned, paralyzed, and poisoned, and the burn is gone, but it's still paralyzed and poisoned, so that's going to set up a 2-hit knockout on this Sceptile. Using your GX attack this early really means that you feared Sceptile taking over the game.
And we do see the allergic, the ability from Gloom. Looking at Gibson's hand, no basic Pokemon to throw down. Grant, does he have that Life Force? Oh, he does have the Life Force.
Oh, my goodness.
What a perfect time to find it.
It really is the absolute best time to find this life. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so here it is. All of those status effects, remember, there were 3 at the start of the turn.
Yeah.
3 between turns anyway. All of them are gone. It's over. You are now not only no longer paralyzed and no longer poisoned, but now you also healed those 60 damage. So all of those effects, they're gone, and now the Sceptile is no longer in danger of getting knocked out. And on top of everything, it's also dealt damage to the Vileplume GX, which of course can get healed away, but still,
it's going to hurt its damage output.
Yeah, this is a big time turn here out of Grant.
We're going to see Gibson just uses the Cynthia and Caitlyn, does find a Guzma. Going to discard the Stealthy Hood, not able to put that in play thanks to Irritating Pollen. Does find himself some energy. That's really all he can ask for at this point, is just looking for as much energy as possible.
And there's the damage output out of the Vileplume GX. Now, oh man, it's a close race between these 2 GX Pokemon. Now, of course, Vileplume GX has a more powerful ability, and if it gets knocked out, then that could be huge here for Grant moving forward. But in the meantime, it's dealing so much damage, and of course, with its ability to help it heal itself, it could potentially still land a 2-hit knockout on this Sceptile, despite the fact that the one Stadium card out of Grant basically nullified the entire GX attack out of the Vileplume.
And with Grant actually retreating the Sceptile, this is going to be a big upcoming turn for Gibson. Right over here in his hand, he's got himself a Guzma and a Grass Energy. That's going to allow him to take this Rowlet Exeggutor, bring it to the active, and he's also going to bring up, most likely, Grant's Sceptile GX right away. Let's see if that's what he goes for. Guzma.
There's a Guzma. There's the Rowlet Exeggutor, and instead it's going to be another Rowlet Exeggutor out of Grant. So instead of going after the Sceptile GX, he feels like the Sceptile GX is no longer the bigger threat, and he wants to go after the Rowlet Exeggutor instead.
Maybe he feels like this is going to allow him to buy a turn or something like that. If he can get a knockout here and save one of his other Guzmas for knocking out this Sceptile later on that's on Grant's bench. What this also does is this actually preserves the Vileplume GX on Gibson's bench. He's going to be able to get use out of that ability for multiple turns, whereas if he had attacked with it last turn, it would have just gotten knocked out. That ability's gone. He's going to have to Brock's Grid it back if he wants to keep using it. Exactly.
I love the fact that he's now attacking with the Alolan Exeggutor. What I don't love is how much that Sceptile GX is going to be able to stabilize itself. That Sceptile GX was basically 1 turn away from being knocked out for 2 consecutive turns, and now it's still in play, and it's no longer going to provide 2 prizes. However, if you manage to knock out Grant's Alolan Exeggutor, then you're going to be up 3 prizes to 6, and it looks like we do see a knockout here from Gibson onto Grant.
Yep, down to just 3 prize cards remaining now at this point. It's almost a reversal of fortunes from what we saw from the last game. Grant being the first one to take the knockout. Gibson saying, it's my time to shine. Vileplume GX making a big difference here since it's not in those prize cards.
Keep an eye on those damage counters on that Vileplume GX. It's now down to 140 damage on it. Slowly but surely, it's becoming more and more powerful, and it'll slowly start to take over the game one more time. In the meantime, though, Grant has had no shortage of supporters, playing a very powerful supporter every turn of the game for the last few turns, as we saw a Colress the previous turn and now a Cynthia. Just brand new hands, finding ways to keep these energy coming is Grant.
A big thing for Grant here. I think he's going to really want to find a Guzma in these coming turns. Like you said, the longer this Vileplume sits here, the more and more damage it's going to heal. It can eventually get down to a point where it has no damage counters on it, then Massive Bloom is hitting for that full 180 once again. Grant is really going to need to find himself a Guzma at some point in order to take care of that before Gibson can heal too much damage.
There's that healing one more time. Now we're down to 110 damage on that Vileplume. That is I mean, it's starting to get out of range, right? Like now it has 130 hit points. It's not easy to hit that 130. Only Sceptile can do it. Once you get one more fragrant flower garden, then at that point you're gonna be out of range of pretty much everything from a one-hit KO. So the window is closing. Is Grant's.
Yeah, and he's going to have a turn here. I think GIBSON's not obviously going to be able to get off an attack thanks to Disgusting Pollen from his active. So GIBSON, as we saw with the Cynthia and Caitlyn, getting back a Guzma. Maybe next turn will be the turn that he goes aggressive, and there is a lot of damage on that Sceptile here. You got to think that's what he's eyeing up.
And now I'm looking for a Guzma out of Grant. If Grant has a Guzma here, which he does not, he only has a Cynthia, that Guzma could have been crucial, as now that Vileplume GX will start to heal itself out of range. But big turn here for GIBSON as he did not see a Guzma out of Grant.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. I'm sure at this point he was just really sitting and hoping he's not going to get it. We're going to let Grant take a look and make sure he reads and knows everything that Vileplume does. And looking at his new 6 cards, I'm not seeing much that's really going to help him immediately. He can get a Grass Energy attachment onto this non-damaged Sceptile GX to try to get that ready to attack. But
looks like that's what he's doing.
But I don't know if ultimately this is going to, help him in his endeavors to win the game, because GIBSON, we know, has that Guzma thanks to the Cynthia and Caitlyn, and he's going to get more healing onto the Vileplume GX. He might not want to, well, he's going to go ahead and bring it up.
Guzma. And now keep in mind that Guzma now means that the Vileplume GX is... He didn't heal the Vileplume GX, by the way.
Well, with the power plant in play, it's going to shut that off. So it's an interesting dynamic here. We saw earlier on he had to use Faba in order to get rid of it, and so he could get that healing going. So that actually was a big card there for Grant, being able to get that power plant in play and shuts off the ability.
So keep in mind those 110 damage still on the Vileplume GX with only 240 hit points. That means that you only have to deal 130 damage. Leaf Cyclone, well, it deals 130 damage.
Pretty good math set up here on Grant's side. He will get this knockout and take his first prize of the game, but GIBSON with just 1 prize card remaining, 3 energies on that Rowlet and Exeggutor. All he needs is a Guzma to knock out this Gloom on the bench to close out the game.
Yeah, it was an interesting play, was that Guzma out of GIBSON. He really wanted to get himself down to a single prize remaining, but he sacrificed the Vileplume GX to do so. Maybe because the power plant was in play, he felt like it was a fine sacrifice to make, as with the power plant in play, that Vileplume was just going to be sitting there, so you might as well get that final knockout out of it while you still can. But in the meantime,
it looks like GIBSON here off of this end did draw a few too many cards. Definitely unfortunate. Only able to get 1 card. Of course, you draw cards for each of the prize cards you have remaining. Did just take that 2 prize knockout, so he only had 1 card he should have drawn. He drew 3 on accident. We'll have to get words from the judges if there was any penalty given. Usually we will see penalties in that instance, so we'll have to get words from the judges to see what happened.
That can be the top 8 nerves getting to people. I mean, the truth is it happens. But in the meantime, we're seeing 150 damage applied onto the Sceptile GX. Rowlet and Alolan Exeggutor dealing 150 damage with Calming Hurricane. And it's a double prize card penalty applied onto GIBSON. So now that means that Grant only needs to take 4 total prizes to win the match. And having already taken 2 against the Vileplume, that means he's got basically 2 prizes remaining against GIBSON's 1.
And as we do see on the screen there, those 2 red Pokeballs at the top on Grant's side, signaling that he does indeed need to take 2 less prize cards. GIBSON drawing those extra prizes, really hurting him here, awarding him a double prize card penalty. But these are the rules. We have to adhere by them. And now, is this a situation where Grant is able to potentially get back into this game, needing to take 2 less prize cards?
Well, you bring Vileplume with Disgusting Pollen up. You hope that your opponent cannot attack with the with any Pokemon. Yep. And that's your key to victory. If you can do this and then take your final 2 prizes, you're going to win if you're Grant. However, GIBSON only needs something like a Guzma to win the match.
Yep, that's all it's going to be. We'll need also a way to retreat. Since there is, not enough energy on that benched Vileplume, it does have a 3 retreat cost, so it'll take him a little while. And that option actually has been taken away to just knock out that Vileplume, since it has been that Gloom, since it has been evolved into a Vileplume. There is still enough damage on that Sceptile to get it knocked out, but if Grant is able to heal that with something like an AZ or even the Jungle Heal GX, that option's taken away as well.
Yeah, it looks like the Sceptile only has about Well, I'm not even going to bother doing the math right now. Definitely not going to try that. In the meantime, though, we do see Grant and GIBSON hoping to take their final prizes, hoping to win this game 2. If Grant wins game 2, that means the match is over. Grant advances. If GIBSON wins the second game, that means we're shuffling up one last time to determine who moves on to the top 4.
Yes, there is 80 damage remaining on that Sceptile, so just out of range of being knocked out by Disgusting Pollen Vileplume. So it will have to be a calming, a Tropical Shake from the Rowlet Executor to pick up that KO.
Okay, so the energy not flowing anymore for GIBSON. And in the meantime, that super boost energy from Grant, just crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. A big card here, letting him get the just one attachment, effectively being 3. And we also see on the Downer Shock, putting the Rowlet and Executor to sleep. I do believe GIBSON has a Mallow and Lana in his hand. So he could set up like a 2-turn combo where he uses Mallow and Lana to move it to the bench, and then Guzma's on the following turn to bring up that Sceptile to take his last prizes.
Now, GIBSON did pass the turn, I believe.
Yep. Looks like it. And I'm not sure if he's doing this. Maybe he knows he doesn't have access to his other Guzma right now. He does only play 2 copies. We've seen one used twice, thanks to Cynthia and Caitlin. Maybe just waiting to see if he can draw into it.
180 damage on this Alolan Executor right now. Oh, Stealthy Hood attached onto it. Oh, man.
That's it. GIBSON plays the AZ in order to pick up the Vileplume, throws down that Stealthy Hood, allowing him now to hit through, flips to see if he can get heads to win the game, and he flips the heads, takes his last prize cards. We're going on to a game 3.
Unreal. So that was just, so basically he needed to stop himself from being item locked, and he did so with that supporter card. Once he was able to do so, he plays the Stealthy Hood, allowing him to attack past the Vileplume, but that's still not enough. He still has to find a way to get past the confusion.
Yep.
Does so with that heads, and is able to take his final prize of the game. That huge turn out of GIBSON.
Yeah, that 50-50 coin flip going in GIBSON's favor. A super exciting moment there. You can see GIBSON is super happy that it went that way, and that was just a totally different game from game 1. It really felt like Grant was totally in control the entire first game of this series, and I think that really does have a lot to do with the Vileplume GX being in the prizes for GIBSON. He had access to it in that second game. It really did make a big difference, and I'm sure GIBSON, as he sets out those 6 prize cards, is going to really be hoping that he has access to Plume.
Grant has 2 advantages in the energy war. One is Sceptile GX. Sceptile GX attacks for 1 energy and 2 energies. That's something that only Vileplume GX can do to match him. On top of that, he also plays Super Boost Energy, which GIBSON does not. So those are 2 ways that he can accelerate his own energy and find ways to attack when GIBSON would normally not be able to. We've seen them both come out in both games and really apply the pressure onto GIBSON. However, GIBSON gets more powerful as the game progresses, as he has more powerful attacks that he's starting to build up, and that is what ended up happening. Now, Grant almost came back due to GIBSON's mistake, but in this particular case, that coin flip landing on that heads meant that Grant was going to have to shuffle up his cards and move on to game 3, as game 2 was not kind to Grant.
Over in GIBSON's prizes, we did see a Guzma. That could definitely be a key card. Grant did prize one of each of the Vileplumes, which might be a really scary situation in most matchups, but in this matchup, it really doesn't make that big of a difference. The game is so slow, you don't really mind having just access to the one Downer Shock, and like we've said, the Irritating Pollen is not as relevant in this matchup as it might be in others.
Now, we're seeing a pseudo-Wudo start out of Grant as we have now started game 3. Remember, these players go fast, man. Before we can even finish our sentences, they're already shuffled up and starting game 3.
They're excited. They want to finish up this top 8. They want to see who's moving on to top 4 and figure out who gets that one step closer to becoming regional champion.
Now, despite starting pseudo-Wudo, we're seeing a very powerful start out of Grant on this first turn. He found the Cherish Ball to find himself a Tapu Lele. Tapu Lele found himself the Bridget, which found all 3 key Pokemon out of Grant. Now, that's not enough, though. Also plays a Netball, looks through his deck, and finds himself a Grass Energy. So he's going to have an energy attachment to go with this powerful start on the first turn of the game.
This Sudowoodo is actually a really unfortunate starter for Grant. It does have a 2 retreat cost, so he can't simply just attach to it in order to move it to the bench to start getting super growth out. It's going to need to be something like an AZ or a Guzma. And GIBSON has a very quick turn. Just going to be an attach and a pass. It looks like his hand is clogged up with a ton of Pokemon.
And the worst part is that they're Pokemon that are not basic Pokemon. So he can't even start evolving and start powering up his bench. Really, he's just forced to attach and pass. Now, that means no supporters. That means, I mean, this gives Grant a huge tell as to what Gibson's hand looks like.
And he does find the AZ. He only plays 2 copies of this card in his deck. He's able to have one in that opening hand effectively, and is going to go ahead and get the attachment onto Rowlet and Exeggutor. If Gibson doesn't find something like a Pokegear, I feel like we might see Grant go for the, yes, Irritating Pollen here, trying to shut down any of those outs Gibson might have with something like a Pokegear to find a supporter card. Yeah,
of course, if your opponent is stumbling around, you definitely want to start irritating him with your pollen so that he's no longer able to start drawing into his key item cards. That really lowers his odds of really coming back from this awful start.
We do see the Sunshine Grace. Going to look for a Pokemon. Looks like Grant has moved a Oddish to the front right away and wants to maybe super growth that. Actually going to go ahead and chain the 2 Sunshine Graces together. This is actually a really important play. There's really no reason not to just go ahead and get the other Grovyle out because it lets you get the multiple searches on the following turn.
Indeed it does. And now I believe we also found maybe a Snivy?
No, it looks like it is an Oddish right there on Grant's side, and going to be using Super Growth. Goes back into the deck, and we'll probably see the disgusting Pollen Vileplume be the choice here.
Wow, I can't believe I said Snivy. I meant Trico.
Well, actually, he's going to just leave it as the Gloom, and this actually makes sense. He wants to use that Irresistible Aroma in order to maybe get something down on Gibson's side that he doesn't want to bench, and also maybe just get a peek at his hand. We saw him really utilize this through both of the past 2 games in this set, where he is just getting an idea of what Gibson has. He's able to formulate his game plan based on what he knows Gibson is going to have access to.
All right, I have good news and I have bad news if you're a Gibson fan.
Let's see it.
The good news, he found a supporter. The bad news, it was Cynthia and Caitlin. So he was only able to discard one of his cards to draw 3 new ones, and it did find him a Grass Energy, but not much else. Still no basic Pokemon, still no ways to keep progressing his board state. Instead, Grant is going to get the good news that he is a few turns away from being able to potentially bench Gibson. Now, he does have to dodge another energy attachment out of Gibson, because then Gibson is going to be able to start dealing damage and healing himself in case you're starting to deal damage to him. But otherwise, this could mean that Grant could take a very quick Game 3.
Yeah, and Gibson actually just draws and pass. He did draw that Rowlet and Exeggutor. I don't believe it's optional, actually, to bench the Rowlet and Exeggutor. I believe if Grant looked at his hand, he should be forced to bench the Rowlet and Exeggutor, so we'll try to get a check on that. Gibson does have that Pokegear in his hand, which would normally be a great way for him to find a supporter, but on Grant's side, that Vileplume is preventing that option.
Irritating Pollen, there it is. And now, well, speaking of Irritating Pollen,
Computer
especially
search.
useful against Computer Search. And Mallow and Lana.
Looks like it's going to be the Guzma.
Yeah, that's a Guzma.
Oh, and Gibson does find that 3rd energy. If that Mallow,
wow. What a perfectly timed Guzma, right?
If it had come 1 turn later, he would have been able to start attacking, but no damage got into play for Gibson this turn. And yeah, it's just
a handful of nothing.
He's got a huge hand, but they're just all unplayable cards.
Draw a pass out of both players, basically.
Yeah, and yeah, over on Grant's side, he's not really finding too much either. He needs to find himself some Grass Energy if he wants to start getting some damage out. He can't really capitalize even on what Gibson has.
There's an AZ, so we're going to finally see some damage come out, and it's actually going to be from Gibson. He's going to be the first one to attack, 150 damage onto the Sceptile.
Yeah, I bet that's the fastest Gibson's ever played an AZ in his life. He's like, yes, I finally get to start doing something. We can attack. And
now, it is a heads here from the Gloom, so that Alolan Exeggutor will come right back down, and now we're seeing 2 Vileplumes in play. We're seeing 2 different Sceptiles in play. And, of course, the Alolan Exeggutor also in play. Another Guzma. That's just going to be the only thing Grant can do to really keep this game slow, as he's now the player who can't find the energy. This is such a weird little matchup, but it really leads to very exciting games.
A very odd one. Gibson does top deck that Mallow and Lana. He can just switch this Rowlet Exeggutor to the bench. Doesn't have to discard any cards because that is the first effect without the additional effect of healing 120 damage, since there is no damage on the Rowlet and Alolan Exeggutor.
Looks like he chose not to, though.
Yeah, I think this is smart as well. He knows that this is one of his only ways to heal damage in the matchup, and healing damage in a game like this where you're not really taking one-hit KOs is a really big deal.
That's a very safe play. It's a very calculated play. It means that he's banking on the rest of his deck, kind of helping him out here. And in the meantime, though, he's just giving more and more turns for Grant to start finding energies. He could have tried to race it, but he decided that that the Mallow and Lana is far too important for him to for him to risk in a race situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And at least he can hold on to it and try to move it whenever.
Super boost energy. Once again, a critical card in this list for Grant.
Yeah, just that one attachment, not needing 3, just 1 in order to get some damage in play.
And it's a lot of damage. It's 60 damage plus also a status condition, of course, to put him to sleep, but then the heads does mean that the Alolan Executor wakes up. Faba, though, a crucial Faba, as that basically removes 3 energy from the field for Grant.
And Gibson showing, yep, I've got all my Rallied Executors here. Not too much going on. Grant doesn't have the Irresistible Aroma quite anymore. Gibson does finally find an Oddish, but unable to attack thanks to that disgusting pollen.
Is it? Oh, I was going to say, is it possibly time to see the Mallow and Lana, but it doesn't seem to be so. We have 2 energy on the Vileplume. The Vileplume 1 energy away from being able to start attacking once again.
Yeah, doesn't want a Mallow and Lana yet. Ooh, actually gets the Vileplume GX down. This can start getting some healing going if that Power Plant does get removed from play.
A very nice Vileplume GX, and now we see the Stevens Resolve, a huge Stevens Resolve. Now that's going to mean more energy coming into hand, maybe another supporter that allows him to retreat that Alolan Executor. Plenty of options here out of Gibson. Maybe we even see another Stevens Resolve. Maybe he's going to start chaining them. The truth is there's tons of options available to him, and he chooses to go for these 3. Instead, now we see a huge end, and by huge, I mean both players are shuffling like 20 cards right back in.
Yeah, both these players just had massive, massive hands. I wonder if that was a top deck from Grant over on his side, or if he was just holding on to that, waiting for Gibson to do something, kind of knowing that he's not doing much right now, waiting for him to find one of those Stevens to try to disrupt him.
All right, both players shuffling in and drawing 6s. Neither player has taken a prize in this 3rd and final game. Now the 3rd energy, though, does come down. Downer Shock dealing 60 damage and putting him to sleep. So now, can he wake up? It looks like he does. So 120 damage on this Rallied and Alolan Executor. And the Power Plant will not allow the Vileplume EX to start healing it away, but still, Stevens Resolve, the only card being played here from Gibson. Will Gibson find himself another supporter with it? Maybe a Mallow and Lana at this point. Tons of options available.
Yeah, this Vileplume GX is one of Gibson's only ways to deal with Grant's own Vileplume, and you got to think that he got himself the pieces here, right? AZ plus an energy would be enough in order to get that one-hit KO, and it would actually put Gibson in a really solid spot, I think. So let's see if Grant has a way to disrupt it. No, there is no in on his side. It's actually just going to have to be a Cynthia. Still the same effect for you, shuffling and drawing 6 at this point early on in the game, but does not get that disruption option that he had last turn.
All right, Downer Shock once again could be the attack out of Grant after he draws his 6 new cards. Wants to find more energies, wants to start building up other attackers, and it looks like he does find one more. So now that Sceptile is starting to get powered up, starting to feel the pressure is Grant, as Gibson now could potentially have a huge turn after that Stevens Resolve. We see that AZ in his hand, and there it is. That AZ brings all that damage out of the field and brings that Alolan Executor right back to his hand, and it's going to be the Vileplume GX that's going to be attacking here. And that down goes that Vileplume with 3 energy on it. 1 attack out of that Vileplume GX is all it took.
And a big prize card right here, as we can see in Gibson's hand. He did find the Guzma right off the prizes right away, so that's going to be really key, especially since that Rallied Executor does have 3 energies on it all ready to go. It seems like Gibson's game was going terribly, right? He drew all those Pokemon at the start, didn't really get too much going, but he's been able to find time since Grant wasn't really pressuring him. He was able to get time to get 3 energies on this Pokemon, 2 energies on this Pokemon. He's got 2 really high HP Pokemon that are just ready to start attacking.
Now Grant telling us, slow things down, boys. We're playing another end. We're slowing Vileplume down as much as we can. We want to extend this game as much as we can, as now at this point Gibson is the one with the overwhelming board advantage. Now it is Gibson's turn here. Gibson has just had his hand shuffled back in and was only able to draw 5 new cards. Did this end help him, or did it hinder him? Remember, with 60 damage on this Vileplume GX and the Power Plant in play, we are not going to see this Vileplume start to heal itself, which means it's only dealing 120 damage. And that looks like that's all it did. It dealt 120 damage onto the Sceptile GX, and now it's right back to Grant.
Yeah, I wonder if Gibson could have gone for that GX attack, Allergic Explosion, this turn. He did that in this similar situation in the last game, and Grant was able to just counteract that right away with the Life Force Prism Star, which was definitely really unfortunate, but Life Force Prism Star is just a one-of in the deck. You got to think, man, it's not super likely he'd have it in his hand right now, but Gibson just knew that if he got this damage down into play, he'd be able to use Mallow and Lana on the following turn and be able to take a knockout on the Sceptile, and that's exactly what's going to happen here.
Mallow and Lana, huge Mallow and Lana. That means 120 damage removed, but more importantly, it's going to be a Sceptile GX knockout. That is a 3 prize advantage now here for Gibson, but more importantly, that's more energy off the field for Grant.
Yeah, big deal right there. Gibson once again taking the 3-prize lead before Grant has been able to take his first. Grant just has to send up that Rowlet and Alolan Executor with no energies at all on it. Maybe just trying to let it take a hit or two early on in this point in the at this point in the game, and seeing if he can AZ it later on. Just gonna use Bridget. Only has one bench spot open.
The world's least exciting Bridget, finding absolutely nothing, just a supporter to play with no real effect to go with it. Now, with no energy in play, besides the one energy on the Alolan Executor, that seems to be kind of a mirror image of game one here. This time, Gibson being the one with the huge advantage against his opponent. With no energy in play, what can Grant do to climb back out of this hole?
Yeah, I mean, and a big deal here, actually, for Grant, if we remember correctly, he did prize that Brock's Grit this game. I believe there are 4 grass energy in his discard pile already, meaning he just has access to 3 more through the rest of the game. That's super boost energy, as we see up here in the Lost Zone, not something he's going to have access to. So he might only have just 2 more energy to try to close this game out, at least until he can get the Brock's Grit.
Cynthia and Caitlin was able to find, I believe, a Mallow and Lana into from Gibson's discard pile back into Gibson's hand. So that's a huge supporter to find in this matchup, as you just don't deal a lot of damage. And now the Life Force has to counter the Power Plant, which is actually a big deal because now Gibson is going to have access to that Fragrant Flower Dance from here on out, unless he decides to counter it once again with that Power Plant, which he does.
Yeah, it chooses to do that right away. There's no damage on his side, so he's not getting use out of the Vileplume's ability, at least right now. And he does have 3 Fabas in his list, so he has ways to get rid of his own stadiums if necessary.
Alolan Executor for both players. No energy on the field besides the 1 energy for Grant, and Gibson still has a plethora of energy on his field.
Yeah, he actually has a Steven's Resolve in his hand here. Gonna go ahead and choose to play that, letting him search for any 3 cards to put them into his hand. Right away finds a Guzma. We know what he wants to do on the next turn.
Remember, he still has that Mallow and Lana in his hand, but once again, choosing not to overextend his hand.
Gibson has not used a GX attack this game, so actually what can happen on this turn if Grant does not disrupt Gibson or heal this Rowlet Executor that has 90 damage on the bench, all Gibson has to do to win the game is play the Guzma, and he can actually use Tropical Hour GX to do 200 damage and take the knockout on this Rowlet and Alolan.
There it is, the Guzma.
And Gibson has it.
The Guzma means game is over. Alolan Executor gets promoted from Grant, and that means a 3-prize knockout will signify that Gibson is going to be our winner and moving on to top 4.
Yeah, what an exciting series we had there, honestly. The mirror match is always very unique, like we talked about at the beginning. Players have to kind of adjust their strategies much more than what they normally would have done against any other normal deck, and Grant was able to get a quick lead going up 1-0 in the set.
Indeed.
But Gibson able to fight back, getting that reverse 2-0 in order to take the win and move on to top 4 here in Dallas.
So this was a battle of 2 mirror decks choosing different strategies in their matchup, right? And now both of these decks really struggled to find energies. They really were energy reliant while being energy starved.